Good evening, Dr. Warren, board members, Mr. Miller. Our objective tonight is to educate. We are not present to have this book removed from the school library or removed as suggested from optional reading. We are requesting that the House of the Spirits be removed as required reading. Required for equal in-class discussion. Required for equal in-class instruction. Required for equal informed participation. Required for the equal opportunity for the student to evidence proficiency to the teacher on the subject matter, and required for equal attendance. Requiring students to opt out of this disturbing book, for them to be separated and excluded from the teacher and class for any reason, much less for choosing an alternate book for the part of the semester, is discriminatory treatment. We also want to make sure that the board and the community are fully informed of the pervasive and repeated sexually explicit content in this book. As you will see tonight, this is not the challenge of one parent. This is a grassroots groundswell of parents and students that feel trapped, ignored, and alienated by a system where there is a little or no oversight or accountability. I would like to submit to the chairman, Dr. Warren, if it is permitted at this time, a petition with over 1,500 signatures from our community that agree with this challenge. Is that okay? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You also each have a statement from Dr. Clint Zimmerman, Dr. Tim Boyd, and Dr. Phil Monroe that the House of the Spirits is unsuitable for high school students. Watauga County residents desire that this book, The House of the Spirits, be removed as required reading. They also desire disclosure to parents of sexually explicit material in books. The current use of the book at Watauga High School requires students to read the teacher-selected book if the student wants equal educational opportunity. The student is required to read this book if the student is to have the equal opportunity to evidence proficiency to the teacher, an equal chance for in-class discussion, and to receive instruction from the teacher who will be assigning his or her grade, as well as equal opportunity to participate, excel, and attend. Requiring students who opt out of this book to be separated from the English honors course is discriminatory treatment. Is this sexually explicit book so educationally necessary that Watauga High School is willing to boot students from the classroom? There is only one honors English class for this grade. In reviewing a high school transcript, a college admissions committee will consider the number of honors and AP courses that a student takes, as well as their GPA. To state that a student can drop down to a lesser English course is to argue that we would rather keep the explicit book than allow students to excel in English literature or optimize their transcript or maximize their grades. Per the teacher's explanation, the alternate reading program is an independent reading program. The student is separated from the room while class discussion of the chosen book occurs each day. The student receives a written plan to follow on his or her own. It was explained to us by the teacher that the student receives no teacher instruction or exam preparation other than the printed plan, unless the student seeks the teacher's instruction outside of the regularly scheduled class time. No class discussion is available for the alternate. Without teacher instruction, exam preparation, face-to-face class discussion, a student is not receiving equal educational services. Note, just as those students that choose to read the required book, just as they receive the teacher instruction, the preparation for exams, and the class discussion, those that choose the alternate book selection should receive the same fair and equal educational services. If the book were relegated to the library or optional for a research paper, it is accessible by a student who actually wants to read it, and the problem is resolved. Please see the first exhibit. The Association of American Educators and the National Education Association both have codes of ethics for teachers that call them to deal justly with students and to not exclude students from participation in any program or deny benefits to them. Rather than our English teachers exercising their authority to include and not exclude students, they are advocating that the only equal alternate is taking a lower level course instead of their honors courses. Is this book really worth our students missing educational opportunities? While The House of the Spirits was selected as required reading to fit the parameter of Latin American fiction, the alternate book offered of Moby Dick was not. In fact, if it is such an equal and viable alternate, why didn't the class study this book when the House of the Spirits was put on hold last semester. After all, since 1971, Moby Dick has been included 15 times on the AP English Literature exam. The House of the Spirits, none. I want to remind you that it is very clear that the U.S. Supreme Court has cases that gives the Board of Education broad discretion and authority to remove books from the classroom containing vulgar, profane, sexually explicit material, or material unsuitable for the age group. Please see the next exhibit. Established Watauga High School policies already address this inappropriate explicit material, conduct, and speech. In fact, Watauga High School censors websites, censors student speech and conduct, censors pre-game music, it censors video and TV resources in the classroom, it censors coaches' language, and even censors possession of obscene literature by students. But somehow books get a pass. For example, from Watauga County School Policy 4.02.70, video resources. Any PG-13 or R, TV-14, TV mature, requires prior approval of principal and parents. Yet this book, heavily laden with sexually explicit and perverse material, is required with no analysis of inappropriate sexual content or the impact on students of such content, and no principal or parent review or approval is required. In the published research entitled The Effects of Aggressive Pornographic Mass Media Stimuli by professors from the University of Wisconsin and the University of Manitoba, they stated that aggressive pornography became increasingly prevalent in sexually explicit books in the 70s. The House of the Spirits joined that trend with over 50 depictions of sexual deviancy, including rape, molestation, and prostitution. Policy 4.02.70 considers age appropriateness and maturity level of students for videos and resources, yet no such consideration is made for books. This is an inconsistency without logic or reason. From Watauga County Schools Rules of Conduct 5.07.20, the possession of literature which is obscene is prohibited, yet this book is allowed. From the Watauga High School Student Handbook this past year, a student shall not engage in any form of a public display of affection, physical or verbal. Avoiding these displays demonstrates respect for the community. Examples of PDA include someone sitting on the lap of another, kissing on the mouth, inappropriate embraces. Without reason or logic, books with much stronger sexuality are chosen as required reading in our classrooms, which makes the enforcement of this PDA policy seem ridiculous. Also from the Watauga High School Student Handbook, standards of misconduct include Category 1 through 4 offenses. Categories 1 and 2 carry consequences of detentions, suspensions, loss of privileges. Category 1 offenses are things like inappropriate language, PDA, inappropriate images. How can anyone read this book aloud in classrooms or in the hallways or anywhere on campus then? From the Student Parent Mobile Computing Device Handbook, Watauga High School has a content filtering solution. Watauga High School takes steps to block questionable content. These are quotes directly from the policy. So we have this policy to block inappropriate, questionable, objectionable material. This book is saturated with sexually explicit material that is confirmed to create images in our students' minds and is intentionally distributed to students without review, filtering, or full disclosure to parents. When it comes to books, we have no standard of decency at Watauga High School. Other Watauga High School policy exists to prohibit sexual or violent lyrics in pregame music. Why not for the audience in the classroom? Under the Watauga County Schools Coaches Code of Conduct, profane and foul language is prohibited. Included in the Watauga High School Parent Internet Safety Information on the school website is much information for parents on how to protect their child from inappropriate material on the internet. Yet the inappropriate material in this book is given to students without parental knowledge or consent. Watauga County has all these policies, yet no policy or standards exist to limit exposure to sexually explicit content in the English class. Sexual perversity can have free reign in the required readings and in-class discussion. This is a gross and absurd inconsistency. We may disagree on the standard, but any reasonable person knows that a standard is needed. I met with the Watauga County Director of Curriculum last month and asked who reviews the compulsory in-class discussion readings for sexually explicit material. Does the principal review this? No. Does the vice principal? No. Administrative committee? No. Director of curriculum? No. The superintendent? No. The board of directors? No. The only means of accountability is a parent accidentally or intentionally learning of the sexually explicit material after it is assigned. In transparency, the best evidence of the perversity, sexually explicit detail, and age inappropriateness of the book is the book itself. I'd like to read passages from the book now. The first one that I'll read is of a 6-year-old little girl being violated by a man. He sat down in one of the black leather armchairs and little by little drew the child toward him and sat her on his knees. This is a 6-year-old. Alba smiled of bay rum, a sweet, fresh scent that mingled with the natural smell of sweaty little girl. She embodied everything he would never have, never be. He wanted to hurt her, destroy her, but he also wanted to continue smelling her, listening to her baby's voice, and having her soft skin within reach of his hand. He stroked her knees, just above the border of her embroidered socks. They were warm and had little dimples. Alba continued chattering about the cook who had stuck walnuts up the chickens' tails for the evening meal. That's the 6-year-old little girl. He closed his eyes. He was shaking. With one hand, he encircled the child's neck. He felt the tickle of her braids against his wrist and squeezed her ever so gently, aware that she was so tiny he could strangle her with very little effort. He wanted to do it, feel her writhing and kicking at his knees, squirming as she fought for air. He wanted to hear her moan and die in his arms. He wanted to pull off her clothes. He felt violently aroused. With his other hand, he ventured beneath her well-starched dress, running his fingers up her child's legs until he found the lace of her batiste petticoats and her woolen drawers with her elastic bands. He was panting. In a corner of his brain, he had just enough sanity left to realize that he was poised on the edge of a bottomless pit. The child had stopped talking and was very still, staring up at him with her huge black eyes. Esteban Garcia took her hand and placed it on his stiffened sex. "Do you know what this is?" he asked hoarsely. "Your penis," she replied, for she had seen it in the illustrations of her Uncle Jamie's medical books. How do you feel right now? This is just one example that we are requiring our students to read and process on their own. There are countless others, but for time's sake, that's the one that I'm going to choose to use. The House of the Spirit contains over 50 graphic descriptions of sexual activity, molestation, rape of girls, the ages of the students in this classroom, sexual violence, adult sex with a minor, prostitution, sex between minors, and sexual perversion with corpse. In any context, the frequency and graphic depiction of sexual deviancy is unsuitable for sophomore-age students. Some depictions produce repulsive imagery in the reader's mind, trivialize rape, and many depictions glamorize promiscuity. So with sexual images conjured up over 50 times, what is the Watauga High School standard? 75? 100 times? There is no standard. This is so dangerous. It is the ultimate slippery slope. Watauga High School needs to set a standard of decency for required reading and give full disclosure to parents, as is in the case of movies in class. One Watauga High School student wrote the following: "Reading The House of the Spirits made me uncomfortable due to its content. I believe literature does not have to be explicit to express the reality of the time period. The meaning of this book was obscured by the explicit content of the novel, which was very prevalent. It is unnecessary to select books with sexually explicit material and imagery, and that is highly controversial when thousands of better literature options exist that don't divide our community and they don't divide our classrooms." Another Watauga High School student who read this book wrote that adults and students process things differently. The Watauga High School student wrote, "I do not really remember the themes of the House of the Spirits or much about South American culture, but I could remember many of the sexually explicit and graphic scenes. This is not surprising, of course. Adults and adolescents are at a different stage of development in life. Students do not generally have the life experiences of an adult, especially with sexuality. How a student handles the heavy diet of sexuality or sexual violence in this book is much different than an adult would." There are many, many researches, but some I'd like to share with you. As a neuroscientist, Dr. Sandra Amott, in an interview with NPR, stated that it is a matter of settled science that the brain is not fully developed until age 25. The area of the brain that helps with decision-making and restrains risky behavior is not fully developed until then. The National Institute of Mental Health and CDC advise media to not discuss teenage suicides due to the contagion of the copycat effect for adolescents, a turbulent time for emotional and mental health. The Partnership for Drug-Free America states that teens are less likely to see negative consequences and more likely to engage in risky behavior, such as careless driving, drug use, drinking, and sex. This is science. The adult sexual material and sexual perversity in the House of the Spirits is unquestionably unsuitable for 15 and 16-year-olds and other high school students. Please see the next exhibit. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, pornography is defined as any depiction of erotic behavior intended to cause sexual excitement or arousal. By definition, pornography includes sexually explicit material in writing and in books. This book includes over 50 sexually explicit experiences. According to research, sexual and pornographic material can lead to destructive, unhealthy behaviors. Dr. Victor Klein, PhD from Cal Berkeley, former professor at University of Utah, and a clinical psychologist, worked with hundreds of patients struggling with sex addiction, sexual deviancy, such as sex offenders. His articles discuss pornography or sexually explicit material that is read or seen. Exposing sophomores to sexually perverse or explicit material has enormous risks. Some students may be at more risk than others, but we don't know which ones. This Cal Berkeley PhD states that to suggest that people are not affected by what they read or see, or that pornography cannot have an effect on you, is to deny the whole notion of education. Research by Dr. Donnerstein of University of Arizona and Malamud from the University of Manitoba indicate that merging sexual and violent imagery increases aggressiveness against women, lessens men's sensitivity about rape, increases callousness toward women, and stimulates fantasies of aggressive rape. In fact, in a study reported to the 1986 Attorney General's Commission on Pornography by Dr. Jennings Bryant, he found that among high school students alone, 31% of males and 18% of females admitted to actually doing some of the things sexually that they had seen in pornography within a few days after their exposure. This clearly suggests the modeling effect or imitative learning effect, as well as triggering effect, that even non-violent pornography has on human sexual behavior in some individuals. In an article in Professional Psychology, Research and Practice, Mac Perlman finds that therapists who were sexually abused earlier in their life actually experienced greater re-traumatization when hearing about their patients' experiences. How much more does it affect our underage teenagers, our untrained teenagers? If students are flooded with excessive sexual innuendo, conduct, and messaging in all walks of life, through iPhones, TV, video and radio, movies, why do we add to that flood with faculty-approved books containing over 50 depictions of sexual acts, perversion, and genitals? The House of the Spirits glamorizes promiscuity in some parts of it. For example, when a grown man, Esteban Trueba, discusses his sexual escapades with 15-year-old Pancha Garcia in The Blue Milk Sea, a description of his bed, or when he shares his enjoyment of Transito, his favorite prostitute, in detail, or when the twin boys skip school and have sex with a woman behind the trash dump, and she sends them, quote, both to heaven with the dark, hot, juicy cavern of her sex. Promiscuity is glamorized. What is the educational objective for glamorizing promiscuity and trivializing prostitution? Why did Watauga High School censor all of the other possible books and select such a sexually inappropriate book? Currently, our high school, our only high school in our county, everything goes when it comes to the lack of standard of decency in book selections for English honors. This book should have been reviewed and should be removed from required compulsory reading. In addition, this would be a great time for Watauga County Schools to develop a rating system for books, such as is used for movies, apps, music, and video games. English teachers are not trained to be counselors for sexuality, sexual deviancy, sex addiction, depression, or to handle these topics of sexuality. Does an English degree train one to handle the potential fallout of sexual perversity included in this book? Do they know which students are struggling with an addiction to pornography? Do they know if anyone in the class has ever been abused? Dr. Philip Monroe is a doctor of psychology that specializes in international and domestic trauma recovery. He is the director of the Global Trauma Recovery Institute and serves on the board of directors of an organization that specializes in child abuse awareness and prevention training. After he reviewed the material from this specific book, he concluded himself, Allende's descriptions of rape and other sexual violence may trigger painful memories of trauma in victims of sexual abuse. It is common for victims to be triggered into episodes of depression and anxiety by reminders of their own abuse. Themes of coercion, violence, sexual assault would be clear triggers for most victims. This book is despairing, dark, and dismal. This could negatively impact a student fighting anxiety and depression. Are English teachers specialized in recognizing depression? They are not trained to handle the implications of such emotional propensities and may not even recognize it. They cannot know exactly what life experiences a student may bring into the classroom, nor exactly what physical, emotional, or mental needs that student has. As we struggle right now with large and serious issues of teen depression at Watauga High School, we need to exercise our responsibility and authority as teachers and leaders to fill our students with as much positive, age-appropriate, constructive, and encouraging materials as possible to help them navigate healthily through the most confusing and vulnerable times of their lives. I would also like to note, it is a federal and North Carolina state crime to possess or distribute child pornography, which is labeled as any visual depictions of sexual nature involving a minor. So why do we have books in classrooms with graphic and detailed descriptions of a rape of a 15-year-old by an adult? Or with two young boys having sex with a woman? Or Esteban scouting out his next 14-year-old underage victim? Or with a little 6-year-old girl being violated by a man? Is it wise, appropriate, or educational to facilitate a 15-year-old student envisioning adult-child sex scenes in his or her own head? After all, distributing an actual visual of this scene would be a federal and North Carolina state crime. Doesn't great literature conjure up imagery in all of our minds? Are these the visuals and images that we want to fill our students' minds with? This indicates that we need to engage in a more progressive, informed analysis before selecting explicit books involving sex with minors. Currently, there is a lack of accountability and no parental disclosure in the selection process. This is not a university. The documented risks to our students' emotional health and character are not worth this. The facts evidence the heavy dose of sexuality, sexual violence, and perversion, and harmful effects of sexually explicit material. A substantial cross-section of our community objects to the use of this book as required reading. At worst, this is an extremely reasonable and logical position and request. At best, this sexually explicit book should never have darkened our classrooms. Students process things differently than adults and are at a different life stage. We do not know who the vulnerable students are. English teachers are not trained in sexuality counseling or dealing with sexual deviancy or addictions. Adding to society's ill-fated desire to expose and market sexuality to our youth is not educational and it is not productive. The mission of the Watauga County Schools is to educate for productive citizenship and lifelong learning. We don't just have a responsibility to our students educationally, but we have one societally. We may give them Latin American fiction and we may give them Lexile scores or magical realism, but at what cost? Depression, darkness, sexually explicit pictures for them to process on their own? Please see this exhibit, which is one of distorted information that leads to confusion and bad decisions. The Kids' Rights to Read letter on the Watauga High School website says that this book is frequently taught in high school classes. The teacher found 19 schools where this book is used across the country. There are over 21,000 schools in our country, over 500 in North Carolina alone. The teacher listed 19 schools from California to Carolina that use this book. Of these 19 schools, 17 use the book as optional reading. Options as in like 1 in 7 choice with parental permission, which is San Diego High School, 1 in 59 choices at Huntington Beach High in California. Only 2 schools list it as required reading, and the rest of the schools use it as only optional or summer reading. Maybe that is because the book has actually been on the 100 most challenged books list of the American Library Association from 1990 to 2009. The overwhelming weight of the evidence supports making this book an optional choice with parental consent. After all, most schools don't use it at all. We admire courageous persons in history, such as Martin Luther King and Helen Keller. Another courageous individual was William Wilberforce, who successfully fought to end the slave trade in England. Wilberforce once said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know." You, the board, have the knowledge and the facts now. You have the discretion and the authority to remove this book as required reading according to constitutional principles. If this sexually pervasive and explicit book remains as required reading, where students have to opt out and miss equal instruction, participation, attendance, and discussion, like ostracized students of the past, then no standard of decency exists in Watauga County schools. Accountability evaporates, and this book challenge process, or worse, will continue to arise. My hope is that we can actually deal with the concerns that are before us, to address and stop the distraction of absolutely irrelevant and unnecessary issues such as censorship, book banning, or readers' rights. Nothing is being censored here. Nothing is being banned. I am simply asking that you find other places for this book outside of required reading, with parental consent, and that you provide age-appropriate material with equal educational opportunities that are inclusive of all of our students. I thank you for your time.